Like if I asked every single one of you, what would you try if you knew people would never say this about you? What would this be? And so my story is that I am a researcher, and I never thought I would have a big public career. And so I did a TED Talk that went very viral. And in the wake of that, I was kind of everywhere for a couple of months, on every CNN.com, NPR. It was everywhere, and something I wasn't used to. And the marching orders from my therapist and my husband were, do not read the comments online. So I read all the comments online. And so one morning, I woke up and there were 2 or 3 new articles out, and I started reading the comments. And they were devastating. They weren't about my work, they were about me. They were super personal. And they were the things that creative people play in their mind and then give up doing what they really want to do. Like if I asked every single one of you, what would you try if you knew people would never say this about you? What would this be? Those were the comments that morning. Of course she embraces imperfection. What choice does she have? Look how she looks. I feel sorry for her kids. Less research, more Botox. Just mean personal attacks, the things that really, up until that moment, had inspired me to stay very small in my life and my career, just so I could avoid those things. So that morning, Steve and the kids leave. I stay home. I get on the couch, and I watch 8 hours of Downton Abbey. And when it's over, I don't want to turn off Downton Abbey. Because the minute you turn off Downton Abbey, then it's like soccer practice and dinner and back to the mean people, and maybe, should I get Botox? And maybe if I stand still when I talk. So I get out my laptop and I do a search for who was president in the United States during the Downton Abbey era. Have you ever done that? Like you're numbing with TV or a movie, and so when it's over, you just like stay in that space by like learning more about the actors and what's going on. I've been doing this long enough to know that this is like, you're laughing with me, not at me. So I put it in, and Theodore Roosevelt comes up, and a quote comes up. And I read it, and this is what it says. It's a quote from a speech that he gave in the early 1900s at the Sorbonne, and a lot of people call it the Man in the Arena speech. And this is the passage that changes my life. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done it better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with blood and sweat and dust, who, at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who, at worst, if he fails daring greatly. So the moment that I read that, I closed my laptop, and this is what shifted in me. 3 huge things. First, I've spent the last 12 years studying vulnerability, and that quote was everything I know about vulnerability. It is not about winning, it's not about losing, it's about showing up and being seen. And if you're going to show up and be seen, there is only one guarantee, and that is you will get your ass kicked. That is the guarantee. That's the only certainty you have. If you're going to go in the arena and spend any time in there whatsoever, especially if you've committed to creating in your life, you will get your ass kicked. So you have to decide at that moment, I think for all of us, if courage is a value that we hold, this is a consequence. You can't avoid it. The third thing, which really set me free, and I think Steve, my husband, would argue has made me somewhat dangerous, is kind of a new philosophy about criticism, which is this. If you're not in the arena also getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback. Period. That's it. If you have constructive information, feedback to give me, I want it. And I'm an academic. I'm hardwired for wrestling around with stuff like that. If you say, hey, you forgot all this literature, or hey, you should have done this, or terrible sentence construction over. Here, like, let's go, let's do it. I love that. But if you're in the cheap seats, not putting yourself on the line and just talking about how I can do it better, I'm in no way interested in
it wasn't between us and the enemy. This firefight, tragically, was between us and us. Friendly forces against friendly forces. Fratricide. The mortal sin of combat. And the most horrific part of war. And when it was over, and the fog of war lifted, one friendly Iraqi soldier was dead, 2 more were wounded. One of my men was wounded, the rest of my SEALs were badly shaken. And it was only through a miracle that no one else was killed. Now, I knew what this meant. It meant that somebody had to pay. It meant that somebody had to be held accountable. It meant that somebody had to get fired for what had happened. So, I began to prepare my debrief. And in it, I detailed every mistake that was made and who made it. And I pointed out every failure in the planning and the preparation and the execution in the operation. And I pointed out who was responsible for that failure. There was plenty of blame to go around. There were so many people that I could incriminate with guilt. But something wasn't right. And then, when I was about 10 minutes from starting the debrief, that answer came, and it hit me like a slap in the face. And I realized that there was only one person to blame for the confusion, only one person to blame for the wounded men, and only one person to blame for the dead Iraqi soldier. And I knew exactly who that person was. And with that knowledge, I walked into the debriefing room with my commanding officer and the master chief and the investigating officer were sitting there waiting for me, along with the rest of my men, including my SEAL that had been wounded, who was sitting in the back of the room with his head and his face all bandaged up. And I stood up before them and I asked them one simple question. Whose fault was this? One of my SEALs raised his hand and he said it was my fault. I didn't keep control of the Iraqi soldiers I was with, and they left their designated sector, and that was the root of all these problems. And I said, no, it wasn't your fault. And then another SEAL raised his hand and said it was my fault. I didn't pass our location over the radio fast enough so no one knew what building we were in, and that's what caused all this confusion. It was my fault. And I said, no, it wasn't your fault either. And then another SEAL raised his hand and he said, boss, this was my fault. I didn't properly identify my target, and I shot and killed that friendly Iraqi soldier. This was my fault. And I said, no, this wasn't your fault either. And it wasn't yours or yours or yours, I said as I pointed to the rest of the SEALs in the room. And then I told them that there was only one person at fault for what had happened. There was only one person to blame. And that person was me. I am the commander. I am the senior man on the battlefield, and I am responsible for everything that happens. And you know what? I didn't get fired. In fact, my commanding officer, who had expected excuses and finger pointing, When I took responsibility, when I took ownership, he now trusted me even more.
So the lesson here is that we're not aware of all of these things that are going on, of how much our emotions are actually governing and determining so much of our behavior. And the solution that I give in my book, the solution for us humans to actually become rational like we imagine ourselves to be, is to become aware of this phenomenon. First, to not think that you're rational, to see the process. So it's not easy, but when you're feeling anger or you're feeling depressed, don't just act on it and mope or lash out, but why? Ask yourself why. What is going on here? Could there be something else going on that I'm not really thinking of? Is there something deeper going on? And just you may not get to the answer, you may not uncover that thing that in your early childhood, but just in asking that question, you're going to create a little bit of space between the signal you're getting from your brain and your reaction. And that space, that time, that 10 minutes, that 1 hour that you don't react is actually what's going to make you a more rational person in the long run. You'll be able to question, well, why am I really interested in buying this product? Is it because I'm being manipulated, or is it something that I really need? I talk a lot in my consulting with people who have to make important decisions. I can bet you that 95% of your decision, the strategy you're coming up with, is infected with emotions. I call it the rosy scenario. You're always imagining the best case that will emerge from this, but you're not seeing all the potential pitfalls. So you want to subtract all of these emotional elements before you make your decision. Going through this process is what will, in the end, finally make you rational.
I was supposed to give a talk at the Naval Academy today. I just found out about 20 minutes before I was supposed to go on that it's not happening because I was going to talk about this reaction against controversial ideas or ideas that we disagree with. I've loved my time here at the Naval Academy. It's been one of the honors of my life. I'm terribly sad and somewhat bewildered. This amazing Institute of Higher Learning is now banning books, and not just banning books, but not allowing criticism of that decision as well. Some people have resigned in protest over it. I felt like I couldn't in good conscience go and deliver this lecture. And on my flight home, I thought, I don't want to allow that to happen. They can prevent me from going on stage, but they can't prevent me from delivering the talk. So I'm going to give the talk that I was going to give at the Naval Academy now. This is obviously a slightly different environment. I was planning to do it on stage. I was planning to have slides behind me. I was planning to address, 1,000 people in person. And that's a little bit different than doing it here in my studio in Texas. But here's more or less the talk that I would have given to those midshipmen. And the idea that the obstacle is the way. Now anyone and everyone can watch it. Hopefully it will reach a larger audience than it was going to reach had everything gone as planned. The challenge of an education, Stockdale would say later, is not to prepare people for success, but to prepare them for failure. And he said that it's in hardship and failure that the heroes and the bums get sorted out. You're going to want to draw on this virtue, but you can only make that withdrawal if you've been making the deposits along the way, if you've developed the compass, if you have cultivated the base of knowledge and experience. For Stockdale, the pivotal moment of his life comes in September of 1965. He's piloting his A-4 Skyhawk over North Vietnam when he begins to take flak and has to eject. And as he is parachuting down into what he knows will be certain imprisonment and quite possibly death, he says to himself, I am leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus. In this moment, he is thinking of what he had learned at Stanford. He is drawing on the wisdom that he had been studying, not just there in his college days, but also in his bunk on the carrier. And there he was exposed to years of solitary confinement, deprivation, torture. He said it was the laboratory of human experience. And it was an ordeal that is almost incomprehensible. And he would say that in these early days, as the highest ranking officer there, he had to put a lot of thought into what his orders should be, how he would communicate to the men he was charged with leading, how they would get through this ordeal. he quickly realized that government policy was woefully insufficient, that it had to be more than name, rank, serial number, and date of birth, that he said that had no chance of standing up in the torture room, that they're under the gun as the masters of their own fate. He said we had to throw out the book and write our own. At Stanford, he remembered Professor Rhinelander telling him that a man with a proper education, should the necessity arise, refound their own civilization. And that is what Stockdale did in the Hanoi Hilton, tapping through the walls in furtive moments and brief encounters, through the letters he wrote home, through the messages that were passed man to man in the way that they resisted in the example he set. He was rewriting what it meant to be a prisoner of war, rewriting what it meant to resist, rewriting what it meant to stand on principle. He said there we were founding a prison civilization, that as a group we had the confidence to disregard bogus orders from home, and we had to become the center of our own world where we could bring out the best in ourselves, as his father had hoped of him as he entered the Naval Academy. They had to develop their own laws, their own customs, even their own heroes. And that is what wisdom is about. That is what it was for. That is what allowed him to not just survive, but as he says famously in the Stockdale Paradox, turn it into an experience that in retrospect, not only would he not trade away, but that all of us, his descendants, able to talk to him and talk to the dead, are better for having gone through. There in the Hanoi Hilton, they're subjected to horrendous things. He was best. He was superior to others. And certainly he was superior to those who tried to break him. And that's what wisdom is. That's what virtue is about. That is the message of the talk I wanted to leave you with. Courage, discipline, justice, and wisdom.
So I say, take ownership. Take extreme ownership. Don't make excuses. Don't blame any other person or any other thing. Get control of your ego. Don't hide your delicate pride from the truth. Take ownership of everything in your world, the good and the bad. Take ownership of your mistakes, take ownership of your shortfalls, take ownership of your problems, and then take ownership of the solutions that will get those problems solved. Take ownership of your mission. Take ownership of your job, of your team, of your future, and take ownership of your life. And lead. Lead. Lead yourself and your team and the people in your life. Lead them all to victory.